Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wildlife Wednesday Weekly Roundup. I'm your host, Tenley Thompson, and we've got some great videos from all over the greater Yellowstone ecosystem this week. The way this is going to work is our guides have been out and about shooting video in Grand Teton, Yellowstone, and the National Elk Refuge. We're going to show you some of this great imagery of wildlife. Then you'll have a chance to win our trivia question of the week. Lastly, I'll be answering your questions live. So if you've got any wildlife biology, national park, or nature-related questions, go ahead and ask me in the comment section. Joining us in the comments this week is our naturalist, Maddie. Everybody say hi to Maddie in the comments, and let's go ahead and get started. Firstly, let's go up to Yellowstone and go with naturalist Josh to explore some wolf activity that occurred in the last week.
Hello everyone, Josh from EcoTour Adventures here. I've got an exciting wolf and elk video from the northern range of Yellowstone to share with you today. So I've been staying in the nearby town of Gardner, Montana. This is the home base for our Winter Wolves and Wildlife of Yellowstone adventure that we do every winter. From town, there are expansive views of Yellowstone and the surrounding national forest, and it's actually not uncommon to see wildlife in the distance or even walking right down the street. Last week was no exception. From town, we used spotting scopes to observe 19 wolves, members of the 8 Mile pack, hunting a herd of around 100 elk just inside the park. As the 8 Mile pack approaches the elk, notice how they aren't trying to sneak up and surprise them. Wolves are coursing predators and seek to get prey moving so they can look for potential weakness. Watch as the pack splits the elk herd, sorting them into smaller groups. Elk make up the majority of wolf diet in Yellowstone, but for an animal whose only weapon is its teeth, hunting is risky. The second leading cause of death in Yellowstone are hunting-related injuries such as being kicked by prey. As a result, only 5% of wolf hunts in Yellowstone are successful. Elk and wolves are a classic example of coevolution in North America. The two species have been interacting for millennia, and natural selection via predation has created a strong, powerful elk to match wits with a strong, powerful wolf. Recent published research from Yellowstone even shows that bull elk will drop antlers later in the spring than other deer species, an adaptation which allows them to be used as defensive weapons. Of the 19 wolves we counted participating in this hunt, over half of them are puppies who have only recently started traveling with the pack. These inexperienced wolves are excited to join in, but lack experience to know when to pursue and when to withdraw. The mature wolves in the pack didn't see the opportunity they were looking for, and like most elk hunts, moved on for another day. The battle for life in Yellowstone, especially in winter, is challenging. Many of the elk in this herd may live well into their teens, if not 20s, overcoming harsh winters, food shortage from drought, and the risk of predation from wolves, mountain lions, grizzlies, and their primary predator, human hunters. Wolves, by contrast, live fast and die young. The average lifespan of a wolf is only a few years, with fewer than 1 in 100 reaching the age of 10. Of course, the wolves don't appear to know this, living each day with the enthusiasm that you would expect from the ancestors of man's best friend. From the northern range of Yellowstone, this is Josh Benton with Jackson Hole EcoTour Adventures. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Josh. Some pretty amazing views of wolves in Yellowstone. Next, let's go down south and check in with EcoTour Adventures naturalist and owner Taylor as he explores the Bighorn Sheep Rut.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us for Wildlife Wednesday. Beautiful day in the Tetons, as you can see behind me. This is a great time of the year to watch wildlife, especially my favorite being the Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep. One of the largest sheep herds in the United States live in Wyoming. Just a short drive from Jackson Hole over in Du Bois, the Whiskey Mountain herd. We made the road trip over there a few days ago to watch the sheep, and it was an exciting time. So yeah, in the videos you'll be seeing large rams with the large curled horns, the ewes with smaller horns, and these sheep, they've just made their way to their winter range. As they drop in elevation, they'll avoid the harsh conditions up high above tree line. and it's important that they have good access to escape terrain as well to avoid those predators. Bighorn sheep are perhaps best known for the head-to-head combat between the males. The horn size is a symbol of their rank, and the mass of the horns is used as a male's best advantage as he smashes into an opponent at speeds of up to 20 miles an hour. It's pretty incredible to see them kind of rear up on their hind legs and then clash, horn to horn. Combat has been observed to last as long as one full day, with approximately 5 to 10 clashes per hour, until one of the males concedes. Males do not defend territories like some other animals, but rather engage in these battles over mating access to a particular female. The male dominance is determined by age as well as horn size. And the ewes are, they come into estrus a few different times throughout the month of December in our location, and will accept multiple rams. Because of the intense competition between males for females in the dominance hierarchy based on age and size, males usually don't breed until they're about 7. Younger males will mate sooner if a dominant rail in their group is killed. But yeah, so before the females come into estrus, males are engaging in these battles. They're sizing each other up, and if there are similar males of size and stature, then they will clash. But they need to be careful. I've seen rams with broken noses, horns that have been broken off, so it's important that they size up their opponent very carefully. So yeah, the female becomes impregnated usually in the month of December, and on average, one lamb is born in June on their lambing range. And then once the lambs can efficiently follow their mothers, the band of sheep, they continue onto their summer range. And about after 4 to 6 months, the lambs are weaned. And it's important that they're weaned before the winter sets in because it's such an energy tax for the mothers. So females, they typically breed when they're 2 to 3 years of age, and males when they're about 7 years of age. And sheep in our neck of the woods, they'll live anywhere from 10 to 15 years on average. And of course, there's a higher mortality rate for the young in their first year. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Thanks for joining us, and see you around.
Thanks, Taylor. Pretty cool views of bighorn sheep. If you've never been out here for the rut, which typically takes place from mid-November to early December, it's really an amazing time to see those bashing heads. And we're so fortunate to have one of the healthiest and largest bighorn sheep herds in the world here in Jackson Hole. Okay, so next up, I've got a really weird one for you guys. We actually had to hold up on this video just for a little bit to make sure that we had all of our facts and ducks in a row because it was so strange, none of us had seen anything like it. Let's check in with Tyler, and he'll go ahead and talk about something he saw late last month.
Hey everyone, happy Wildlife Wednesday. My name is Tyler Greenlee, and I'm standing here on the shores of the Snake River. Now, a couple weeks ago, I filmed an animal that we don't see very often on tour actually swim across the Snake River. Let's go and check out this footage and talk about exactly what is going on here. I witnessed a bat fly out of a tree and land on the bank of a river. And at first, I didn't quite realize what I was looking at. I thought that maybe it was a bird like a dipper or a sparrow that was just getting water along the river. But as I got closer, the bat actually jumped into the Snake River and swam across. And in the video, you can see it using its wings to actually almost like fly through the water, almost like how a penguin swims. And once it reached the other side of the river, it flopped up onto the bank and was trying to get airborne. Now, I was initially very confused about what actually is going on here. This happened when most bats have either migrated south or were hibernating since their insect prey is already gone from the environment. And so a couple different theories I have about this sighting is that this bat is actually sick, and it's hard to know exactly what type of illness this bat might have. Obviously, in the media, we always talk about never picking up bats that are on the ground because they could carry rabies or mites or different diseases that could actually infect you. And so I really do think that this bat is either malnourished or injured or sick in some way. And so this is an animal that we definitely don't want to approach or touch or disturb anyway. Now, as far as the species of bat, I do believe it is a little brown bat or a little brown myotis. We do have several different species of bat in Grand Teton. We have 13 different species that have been recorded. Some of these species are super rare, having been recorded once or twice. They're kind of like birds. Because bats have wings, they're able to travel super far distances and end up in weird places. For example, in Grand Teton National Park, there has been recordings of spotted bats, which are typically found farther west in Oregon, Washington, and California. And we surprisingly get them here occasionally. But of all those bat species that we get, the little brown myotis and the hoary bat are the species that are most prevalent and widespread within the park. And this definitely isn't a hoary bat. A hoary bat is grayish in color and has a more of like a calico coloration to its fur. And this bat is very brown. And this sighting is something that we don't usually see. We don't usually see bats in Grand Teton National Park because they are nocturnal. And oftentimes they are very arboreal. And they're just small creatures that you just don't see a whole lot. And so this was a very unique and special sighting.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into Wildlife Wednesdays. This is Tyler Greenlee, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Hi everyone, it's Josh from Ecotourism Adventures. We've been seeing a lot of elk migrating down onto the National Elk Refuge, and I have a video that I'd like to share with you of them moving around, and we're going to talk a little bit about migrations and why they've come down to the valley. Enjoy. It's early December 2020, and this year early snows in the high country have driven over half of the expected number of elk down onto the National Elk Refuge, where they will spend the winter. All across the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, elk are now migrating out of the high country and traveling down into winter range in the surrounding valleys. Elk and most other ungulates, or hoofed mammals, in the GYE must undertake migrations like these ones each year due to the deep snows which will soon blanket the mountains, blocking access to both their food and their ability to move across the landscape. Each year, females teach their offspring the routes to lower elevation, windswept habitats with shallow snow and available forage. Led by experienced matriarchs, family groups follow the same migration routes year after year. Biologists believe some of these routes in Wyoming could be thousands of years old. Winter range availability is limited, meaning elk end up concentrated in high numbers in these areas, making winter an awesome time of year to get to observe them. We often end up viewing animals from afar with spotting scopes and binoculars, which allow for cool views like these ones while limiting disturbance. As elk gather on winter range, it is common to observe groups of bachelor bulls separate from the family groups which make up cow herds. With their large body size and impressive antlers, bulls have a high caloric requirement, meaning they actively seek out better forage conditions, including pushing female groups off of food sources. Ironically, bull elk often enter the winter in poor physical condition, having lost as much as 10% of their body weight during the rut or mating season. Conversely, cow elk are usually in much better body condition and are also likely pregnant. In the coming months, they will not only carry a full-term pregnancy, but also migrate upwards of 60 miles to summer range right before calving in late May or early June.
From thousands of concentrated elk to moose, bighorn sheep, bison, eagles, and more, winter wildlife watching in Jackson Hole, the National Elk Refuge, and Grand Teton National Park is amazing. From EcoTour Adventures, this is Josh Metton. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Josh. Guys, I am sorry. You have 100% had it right. I forgot to turn my mute off. I usually turn it on during the videos so that I don't make any noise, and I forgot to turn it off this time. So thanks everybody for letting me know. That was actually kind of fun. I got a flurry of text messages and attempted phone calls and all these comments that sort of showed me everybody who's watching right now. So hi everybody, good to see you. Thanks very much for that. I'm a little embarrassed, but what I did want to tell you guys is I was mentioning about the bat, the swimming bat of 2 videos ago, that as well as being a wildlife biologist, I'm also trained as a veterinary technician. And rabies is actually very rare in Wyoming. It certainly can occur, but not at the same almost epidemic proportions that we have in places like the Eastern Seaboard. So don't quite be convinced on the rabid bat train. There's a lot of different things that could have been going on with that bat. Certainly rabies is a possibility. It creates abnormal behavior, but mites would create abnormal behavior. A brain tumor would create abnormal behavior. All sorts of other things could have been possible as well. So while we have found rabid bats in Teton County, it's pretty darn unusual compared to other places in the United States. All right, so super fun stuff. Next, I think it'd be fun to check in with Elise, who's got the most bizarre looking moose. It's kind of bizarre animal week, if you guys haven't noticed.
Hi guys, EcoTour Adventures Guide Elise here again. I was able to capture some video footage about a week and a half ago of a moose that I've been seeing frequently in the park. He is a little bit of a unique specimen in that he has grown just a small antler nub on the right side of his head. That same side, he also just has about half of his ear. The rest of it is missing. And up until the day that I saw him in this video, he did have a small malformed antler on the left side of his head as well. But you will notice that that antler is missing, and all that you can see on his head there is that dark colored pedicle or attachment point for his antler. So he did drop his antler sometime very recently, which is a little bit earlier than we do expect to see moose dropping antlers. Usually they start dropping around Christmas time through the early half of January. That's a normal time for moose to lose their antlers. All of those symptoms together would lead one to believe that he is suffering from carotid artery worm, which is a parasitic nematode. It is widely distributed throughout the western U.S. It is native to mule deer, but at this point it's also found within white-tailed deer, elk, and moose populations. It is transmitted by horseflies, and with carotid artery worm, those worms actually embed themselves in the walls of the arteries and can restrict blood flow to the point that you see symptoms such as malformed antlers, blindness, muzzle or ear necrosis, and central nervous system damage, which we can take a look at this moose and see that he has checked off a number of those symptom boxes. Most animals don't show any signs of sickness. However, they have found that elk and moose are more commonly affected by carotid artery worm. While it's not known for sure, Wyoming Game and Fish estimates as many as 50% of the moose in western Wyoming could carry carotid artery worm. So it is something that does affect a good number of moose in our population here.
So, pretty interesting moose out there in Grand Teton National Park. And a big thanks to Elise for doing some really good research to figure out what the heck was going on with that moose. Sometimes the fun out there when you see animals behaving abnormally or are misshapen in some kind of way or atypical is to play a little bit of veterinarian and try to figure out what's going on. And that moose has certainly been of interest to quite a few of the guides over the last couple weeks. All right, that was pretty fun, right? That's the videos we've got for you this week, guys. If you've enjoyed this, we definitely encourage you to like and share our broadcast. It's definitely huge for us. And I will also mention, of course, that we also do accept tips. So more on that in just a moment. It is time for my second favorite part of the broadcast, which is our trivia question of the week. Okay, so guys, we started this broadcast and our EcoTour Adventures online store during the first COVID closure back in March, April, when things really got bad that first time, as a way to keep our guides working and doing things for us, and also as a way to try to support them and to continue to pay for employee benefits and health insurance. We're still using our online store towards that end. We're definitely one of the only people in the wildlife industry that does health insurance. So if you'd like to help us out, you can certainly tip our guides for doing a great job this evening. Maddie can give you a link to that. Otherwise, if you just would like to actually have real items, we have a lot of cool stuff in that store, perfect for Christmas and what have you. Our featured item of the week are these really, really awesome coffee mugs. They're made by local artist Nicole Gayton. I'm hoping Maddie can go ahead and put her website up so you guys can check out some of her amazing artwork. She collaborated with us to make these really, really fun coffee mugs. So if you know somebody in your life who would like one of these and get a big bear, definitely check them out on our online store. Now, the person who wins our trivia question of the week is going to have a chance to win a $10 gift card towards that towards the store, which is a long way towards one of these mugs. So if you want one, this would be a good way to do it for sure. Guys, we got to go for our First, we got to go to the question from last week before I ask you this week's question. Quite a few people got this one right. I think I might have given it away last week when I was talking. But the question was, what is the name of a group of nuts stored for the winter by a squirrel? What's the name of the group of nuts? A gathering of nuts. So if you guys were participating last week in our trivia question and you answered this correctly, then Elise will have contacted the winner with their code for the gift card for the store. For the rest of you guys, the answer to last week's question, I would have accepted 2 responses, depending on if you were speaking British English or American English. A group of nuts that a squirrel stores for the winter is known as either a cache or a midden. Cache or midden would have been the 2 correct answers that we accepted. Interestingly enough, most of the people who got it correct said cache. I was expecting most of you guys to say midden. So neither one is necessarily more correct than the other. They're both correct. But the next time you say that a squirrel is gathering up nuts, you can say they're caching their nuts. If you want to be proper about it. All right, this week's question. Now, this is the one you have to comment in the comment section for a chance to win that gift card. Is which large mammal is the most numerous in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? So that includes Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and all the national surrounding forests and federal lands and public lands and state lands. What is the most numerous large mammal in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? If you know the answer to that question, go ahead and comment in the comment section and we will go ahead and pick a winner for that gift card to our store. All right, guys, pretty fun stuff. Now comes my very favorite part of the program, which is, of course, the question and answer session. So if you have a question for me, go ahead and ask it in the comment section. I've got my iPad in front of me here. So if you see me looking down, that's because I'm looking at your questions, and I'll see if I can't get you guys some answers. Let's see here. All right, Barb asks, is white nose syndrome present in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem? Great question. For those of you guys not familiar with what on earth white nose syndrome is, it is a new disease, fungal in nature, that affects bats and is very deadly to bats, that is spreading all over the world. The short answer to your question is no, we do not currently see any evidence of white nose syndrome in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It started in the United States on the eastern seaboard, has slowly been spreading its way westward. We did see it in a cave in eastern Wyoming back in 2017, well, winter of 2017-18, right? Because we study it when bats are hibernating. We have not seen it spread since, but unfortunately, it's almost certainly probably a matter of time. Eventually, it is going to affect our hibernating bats here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Bats who hibernate very densely are far more affected by it because it spreads from bat to bat more easily. Because white nose syndrome is a very new illness, we don't know a lot about it, but we do know that one of the major vectors, the way it's spread, is from humans traveling from cave to cave and transporting the fungal spores probably on their shoes. So cavers and people who visit caves are strongly encouraged to go ahead and inspect their shoes and to quote unquote sterilize and clean their shoes as best as possible before transporting it to another cave. It has killed hundreds of millions of bats around the world, and unfortunately we do not have an effective treatment for it at this time. It's very hard to reproduce in captivity, although there's a thought that some antifungals, which are under research and study that have been put in some caves, are certainly showing some promise, and some of those antifungals might be able to be used in the future to spare the vast majority of bats in a cave. But that would require us to go to every cave that contains bats every single winter for the foreseeable future, which would just be an incredibly difficult task. Bats, of course, are incredibly important animals all over the United States, whether you like them or not. They're incredibly important for things like insect control, and of course nuisance insects, whether they be on our crops or are on our skin, are an incredibly big problem all over the United States. So the next time you're eating your corn or whatever else that you might be munching vegetable-wise, go ahead and thank your local bat for keeping the insect population under control. So great question. Thank you very much for that. Let's see here. Pamela asks, do moose rub their antlers off or do they just drop off? Pamela, it's a little bit different in every single individual. So moose grow their antlers from what's called a pedicle. You might have heard Elise talking about that sort of it's this kind of crazy spot on their skull that antlers grow from. So there was some really interesting research this week that was actually talking about the nature of antlers and how the cells in elk antler are actually more similar to the cells you'd find in osteosarcoma, in other words, bone cancer, than they are to normal bone cells. They are very rapidly dividing, which is why an animal like an elk or a moose can grow up to an inch of bone every single day in the growing season on their antlers. It's incredibly rapidly producing bone. What ends up happening is a process that's not terribly well understood when the antlers drop off. But basically, there is a hormonal response at the base of the antler that causes these rapidly dividing cells to basically split and divide off. So the antler cell divides away from the skull cell where typically it's fused. And that process can either be sort of a slow and steady process and then the antler just sort of drops off, or the animal can encourage it along a little bit by pushing against trees or rubbing against the ground. It's definitely thought that it seems like it must be itchy or uncomfortable for them, because they definitely make an effort to get that antler off, just like they make an effort to get velvet off in the fall before the rut. So there must be some sort of instinct that tells them to rub on the ground, itchy or something that's telling them to get it off. Probably a little bit like losing a tooth. When your tooth is loose, you kind of keep picking at it until it sort of falls out, maybe. And some teeth come out very quickly, and some teeth are a little slower to let go. Same kind of idea. Hopefully that answers your question. Renee asks, will the moose be treated for the carotid artery worm? The answer is no. That moose lives in Grand Teton National Park. In national parks, we allow nature to take its course. So basically, we have sort of an ethical rule in most of our federal lands that if an animal's a wild animal living a wild life, and something happens to it that's unfortunate but is not human caused, then we're going to allow nature to take its course. That moose has a role to play in the ecosystem. So that moose may go on to live a relatively long life. It just isn't probably going to have nice, sexy antlers for the female moose to admire. So it might not reproduce, but it could have a long life. That moose could continue to be affected in the future in a way that affects its vascular system and gives it things like frostbite because it's not getting good circulation. Or that moose could be compromised in terms of its immune system and more likely to be hunted by, say, grizzly bears or wolves or mountain lions or other predators in the ecosystem. If we didn't have animals who were not doing as well or less than average health, then those animals wouldn't have anything to eat. So we can't do an intervention on every wild animal that we necessarily see. The exception that we make is there's two exceptions to the rule. The first is if the damage was human caused. So a good example, somebody hits a moose with a car and it doesn't kill the moose, but the moose cannot survive and it's suffering, well, we'll go ahead and we'll euthanize that moose. That was a human-caused damage to a wild animal. We're not going to let it suffer because of something humans did. The other exception we'll make is if an animal is an endangered species and there are not enough of its kind and its species left for it to survive, if an animal like that becomes injured in the wild, then we may take it into captivity and attempt to rehabilitate it. I worked for quite a few years as a wildlife rehabilitator. I've rehabilitated everything from bald eagles and golden eagles all the way down to small mammals and cardinals and the like. And I can tell you that it's a very, very difficult task. I've even spent some time rehabilitating bats. Actually, they're a lot of fun. They're really cute. But it's very, very difficult. If an animal's in poor enough condition that it can be taken into captivity and cared for, its prognosis typically isn't very good. Wild animals typically don't want to be picked up by humans and carried somewhere. But if you do find an injured or orphaned animal and you do want to help, there is certainly wildlife rehabilitation centers all over the United States you can use. None of them are going to accept a moose. A grown adult moose is certainly not going to be comfortable in a captivity situation. And so treatment would not necessarily be able to be administered, and it's against the National Park Service's policy. If it was something like a severely endangered species, so California condor, for instance, and it had broken its wing, we would probably make an exception in that case, just because there aren't enough California condors left on the planet to really allow any one of them to disappear. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see here. Dawn, you're asking a wonderfully controversial question. Those are always fun. So Dawn says, as they cull the Yellowstone National Park bison herd yearly, does this affect the genetics of the herd and will this lead to possible inbreeding? Dawn, you're asking a really, really good question. Okay, for those of you guys who are not up to date with bison politics in America, yes, that is a big topic, believe it or not, bison politics in America. The only genetically pure bison left in the world are in Yellowstone and most likely Grand Teton National Park. Every other bison that you'll see has some degree of cow genes in it. So for instance, if you were to go to Custer State Park in South Dakota and see the bison there, or the Buffalo Gap National Grassland, or any of those places, they would be at between 40 to 60% cow, which I'm not here to give you my personal opinion. I'm here to give you the facts and let you generate your own opinion. But I would argue in this case, that's a hybrid. I'm not really sure that's a bison anymore. And so there's a lot of concern because there's not actually enough bison between Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park for them genetically to have good long-term survivability. They actually need to have a larger population to prevent inbreeding. And the World Wildlife Fund did a study I want to say about 10 years ago now, that said if you were just to leave the Grand Teton and Yellowstone herd alone and were not to try to increase their numbers or spread that population out, that they would go genetically extinct through inbreeding in less than 100 years. But it's way more complicated than that. Everything in wildlife and wildlife politics specifically is, we have the carrying capacity of bison in Grand Teton and Yellowstone, which is to say they are full. And when there are too many bison on the land, much like elephants in Africa, they can be very damaging to the landscape, and they can kind of overeat the land. They can be very hard on trees. And what ends up happening is other wildlife is compromised as a result of that. So just like an overabundance of elk can be very harmful to moose, an overabundance of bison can be harmful to all sorts of animals that are using that same forage and those same plant resources. So Yellowstone and Grand Teton and the National Elk Refuge are pretty full. We don't really have room for more bison, but their population continues to grow. The compromise that has been made with the western states is to allow for bison hunting on the National Elk Refuge and outside Yellowstone National Park. This has been very controversial for reasons that are certainly understandable and you can see, but there's an additional issue, which is bison carry a disease called brucellosis that can affect local cattle herds and can be devastating to cattle ranchers. And so it's very important to them that bison don't leave federal lands and transmit this disease to those ranchers. And so, long story short, and by the way, brucellosis is not harmful to people in the United States. There's a variant of it in the Middle East that can be harmful, but generally speaking, you would not be harmed from it, but certainly very problematic for cattle. Long story short, it's really complicated. On the one hand, we have too many bison in the region, and we need to keep their numbers under control for the health of other wildlife species. On the other hand, we don't have enough bison that are genetically pure as a whole. So the National Park Service is kind of treading this very thin line between different possibilities. The odds are, yes, over time you could see an increased rate of genetic inbreeding if you weren't going to compensate. But remember, the national parks have to work with Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming and the local states. And, these folks who've been ranching on that land have been ranching for generations. And we need to make sure that we are very thoughtful about their needs and concerns as well as the need of wildlife. One of the things to remember about all of these amazing Western national parks is we don't live in some primitive time before people. These national parks are interfaced right onto land that's used by people with modern uses. And we have to find a balance between doing what's in the best interest of our wildlife population and doing what's in the best interest of our people and our citizens. And there is a compromise there. I firmly believe it. It's just going to be a little tricky, and it's going to take a little bit of time and effort. And probably everybody's not going to get everything that they want at the end of the day, but we are going to keep bison as a viable species, and folks will be able to make a living as well. So really complicated, something we've been arguing about in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem for, longer than I've been alive, and I'm 38. So if you want to know more on that, I encourage you certainly to look into it. Lots and lots of information out there, lots of opinions, but the short factual version is everybody has a valid point of view on this, and there are no easy answers. So hopefully that answers your question. Pretty complicated for sure. Let's see what else we've got here. There's some comments that I think I'm not seeing the reference on. Like Maddie just put Studio 54 up, and I have absolutely no idea why, but it probably makes sense to you all in the comment section. I'm just not seeing that. Let's see here. This is a great question. Michael asks, tomorrow is Hanukkah, and during Rosh Hashanah in spring, the shofar, or ram's horn, is used as a musical instrument. Are bighorn sheep horns hollow, and could they be used? Really fun question, and it's been asked of me quite a few times over the years. The short answer is yes, bighorn sheep horns are hollow, and yes, in theory, you could make a shofar from them, but there's a couple different issues. Part of the tone of a shofar is how it's curved. And so traditional shofars are a little bit of a different shape. Bighorn sheep horns are a little too curly to pull it off. Certainly would love to see some of our local synagogues make shofars out of bighorn sheep horns, but I've never seen anybody actually try to do it. You could also, of course, just as the sheep eater people did in historical times, immerse bighorn sheep horns in hot water. In the case of the sheep eater people, they used to put it in boiling hot springs for a period of time and probably straighten it a bit. So without my understanding the very, very difficult process of creating a shofar or sheep's horn, ram's horn, I don't see any reason why you couldn't, but I also notice it hasn't been done. And you'd think that certain congregations would want to try and do it with a native wild sheep here in the Americas. And so there must be a reason, tone or sound or something, that it's certainly not more widespread. But I have certainly wondered the same thing, as have many of my guests over the years. And a very, very happy Hanukkah to all of you who are celebrating this evening. I hope that you all have great blessings in the coming year for sure, guys. All right, awesome, great question. James, I knew somebody was going to ask us, any update on 399? Of course there's an update on 399. She is still out and about. For those of you guys not familiar with what we're talking about, 399, you want an update on a number. No, this is a bear. This is a grizzly bear. She has quadruplet cubs. She is still out and about. She's been hanging out in Grand Teton National Park. She's decided not to leave the boundaries of the park again. There was some video footage that was taken this week of her in Grand Teton National Park, and I worked really hard to try to get permission of the owner of that video, who didn't ever actually get back to me. But if you go on YouTube and you look up 399, you might be able to see this footage of her wandering around Grand Teton National Park this week. She's definitely still out and about foraging for food with the cubs, and we'll certainly keep you updated. But views of her have been pretty few and far between, as would be expected this time of year. She might be the only bear left in Grand Teton National Park who's awake at this point. So great question. Brittany, I kind of went into this a little bit earlier, which is why do we intervene sometimes with some diseases and some species and not with others? It depends on a couple of additional factors. I referenced somebody asking something a little bit similar earlier, but I'll add a couple different things. If the species is suffering from an invasive disease that's non-native, white nose syndrome being an example of that, we might decide to take intervention. States might decide to take intervention when a federal government might not. If the disease is zoonotic and can be transferred to other species or to humans or put humans at risk, we might decide to intervene for diseases under those circumstances as well. But if it's a wild animal suffering from a native wild disease on a wild landscape, that animal has a role to play in the ecosystem, and we typically don't intervene. So hopefully that answers that question. Let's see here. Oh, well, there we go. Once again, Maddie bearing the headline. He says he saw 399 this morning, and they continue to pack on the pounds. Well, thanks, Maddie. Where's the video? We'll see if we can't get that for you next week. Let's see here. Susan, you've asked another really wonderfully controversial question, which is why aren't some of the bison herd I was talking about earlier relocated? In fact, they are. So Yellowstone National Park is working on a program with Native American tribes all over the western United States to take Yellowstone bison who have tested negative for brucellosis and do not have the disease and place them on tribal lands. A lot of these Native American peoples celebrate the idea of the return of the bison, which is very important to a lot of these Plains Indians peoples, to their land. Depending on the state that the sovereign tribal land is connected to, there are various levels of politics and controversy associated with that. So for instance, Montana is not highly supportive of these native peoples bringing bison back to the land, versus Wyoming is highly supportive of bringing some Yellowstone bison, for instance, to the Wind River Range in the Wind River Reservation here, which is the Shoshone, Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho people. So it just kind of depends. The Crow Reservation has been relatively successful with their bison herd. And then there's one private citizen who also has Yellowstone bison, and that is Ted Turner. And that's a kind of a long, complicated story why that is, so we'll leave it for another day. But he also does have some of these Yellowstone bison. So there is an effort being made to do that. It's probably going a little bit too slowly in terms of genetic viability, but we're making some progress. It's kind of hard, actually, to find places to put bison. They tend to topple fences. They can be aggressive towards people. They can be certainly aggressive towards other animals, and we certainly don't want them inbreeding with cows, because that's the whole reason we're trying to solve this problem in the first place. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see here. So Mark is asking, what holiday traditions are done at Grand Teton National Park for animals that many come to see? Mark, I'm going to try and see if I understand this question correctly. So there's a lot of things we do over the holidays here in Jackson Hole that are traditional. If it was not a COVID year, for instance, Santa comes to visit the square and you can go sit on his lap. He comes in via dog sled, which is pretty cool. There's not a lot of other communities in the United States that have Santa visit via dog sled. And of course, on Christmas Eve, when Santa arrives to bring presents to all the children in Jackson Hole, he actually makes a longer stopover than is typical in other communities, because he can stash the reindeer out in and amongst the elk out on the National Elk Refuge, give them a little bit of a rest. You know, it's a pretty long evening. They can go ahead and they can get some of that great food and alfalfa pellets that the elk are eating out on the refuge, get a rest, and then they can continue on their way. A great holiday tradition out here in Jackson Hole is to take a sleigh ride out on the National Elk Refuge. That's something you can actually do all winter long, and it is one of the programs that we actually offer. You can actually go out and see all of the wildlife out on the National Elk Refuge on your own private sleigh with your own biologist. It's really fun, lots of warm blankets, and you can get within a couple feet of the elk because they're used to the sleighs and don't see them as a threat. A lot of other people, me personally, for instance, I put out special bird treats on Christmas Day for our local birds. We definitely don't feed wildlife in the national park. We don't want them to become dependent on people for food or make their way into human areas and neighborhoods. Great way for them to get hit by cars and other things. But lots of little local special traditions that we do that certainly involve wildlife and animals. So hopefully that kind of answered your question. That was sort of the gist of what you were asking. Let's see here. Jennifer asks, when did 399 have her babies? I saw them in early June and they've grown so much. Jennifer, they were just born last winter. They are less than a year old. Isn't that amazing? So they're going to spend another year with mom, and then they'll go into hibernation with her one more time, and then they'll be off on their own as what's known subadults. So they're awfully big at this point. They're not quite as big as she is, but they're getting there for sure. And it's going to be a pretty tight fit in that den. Let's see here. Oh, Maddie is correcting me. Tom Brokaw, another private citizen, also has a small herd of bison in Montana. Maddie, are those Yellowstone bison? Well, they must be, or you wouldn't have put that. So there you go. There's a couple people, Ted Turner and Tom Brokaw. The rest of them are on Native American tribal land. So great question there. Let's see here. Okay, I think I've gotten everybody's questions this week. That was really fun. You guys had some really good ones for me. I hope you all have a great week, a wild weekend. You stay safe, you stay strong out there. It's such a pleasure spending every week with you all. I am so excited to be here with you. All right, so long.